Welcome back to another episode of Unreleased or Unobtainable. Within these videos, I explore games that were completed to some sort of degree but never officially released, or alternatively, games that were, but are tremendously expensive because they're so rare. In both cases, I am thankful for emulation. Geist was one of the first games to be announced for the Sega Dreamcast. As an additional claim to fame, it was also the first game in development in-house by Sega in North America. With gameplay reminiscent of Star Fox on Nintendo platforms, gamers would control a spacecraft on rails as it travelled for a set route along resplendent and detailed Martian environments. Naturally, the core goal was to blow an invading force of alien baddies to smithereens. It was destined to be a launch title for the Dreamcast in America, but was eventually cancelled due to countless missed deadlines and disagreements with Sega Japan. As we'll soon discover, however, naturally, there is more to this story. Geist was first reported on at E3 1998. Here, Sega showcased a demo behind closed doors that blew the socks off anyone that witnessed it. However, it was alleged that this demo was instead pre-rendered. At least, this was according to the December 1998 issue of CVG. They claimed that instead of a stock Dreamcast, what was shown was actually running on a powerful computer. Regardless, the game would be shown again at the 1998 Tokyo Game Show, where reactions were more mixed. Supposedly, this build was 80% complete. The graphics were considered amazing, if jerky, and there were no enemies present. At this point, the release date was slated for the 10th of December 1999. But, as per the reason I'm making this video, that obviously didn't happen. The narrative online for years was that development took too long, the budget blew out, and after 18 months, Japan cracked it. This is true, although not entirely straightforward. The source of this abridged version originated in an issue of EGM from the December of 2000. Nimai Mal, who was the lead programmer, claimed in an article about unreleased games that the graphics were 90% complete and the programming was 65 to 70% complete at the time of cancellation. That's all we had to go on until late 2021. In episode 304 of the Retro Hour, which as an aside talked about me once when I built my Vectrex Mini, interviewed Mark Subotnick, who was a producer for Sega America during this period. He bared all during this interview, wasting no time to lay the blame of the cancellation on Yuji Naka, who was the co-creator of the Sonic series and quite powerful within Sega during this period. The story goes that Naka toured Geist development studio with his Japanese team. During the tour, he studied the studio's custom game engine and other proprietary software tools. During the visit, Subotnick alleges that Naka started speaking to his team in Japanese, assuming none of the Americans could understand the conversation. This was not the case, however, as several team members were actually fluent in the language. Naka suggested to his team that they should cannibalize the studio's technology for a Sonic game, and then fire everyone in the studio when Geist shipped, except for a single engineer who knew the systems. Understandably, this upset the team, and most of them left, leaving the studio with a serious brain drain. Since the software was proprietary, it would have taken a lot of time and resources to hire and train new recruits. Subotnick's last recourse was to ask fellow studio, Visual Concepts, for help, since they were the only other Americans working on Dreamcast games during this period. But as you can imagine, they were quite busy preparing their own games for the console's launch and had to decline. So, in the May of 1999, Sega COO Bernie Stolar announced that the project was officially cancelled. Obviously, there is a version of it we can play today, since you spent several minutes watching footage of me playing it. But before we get into the story of how it's available online, let's check out what this prototype actually has to offer. Booting up the disc, and we're presented with a menu that does not look like it belongs in a Dreamcast game. Very functional of course, but not what we'd see in retail. The options are to start the game as is, individual access to levels 1 to 6, and two extra options titled Mike's Room and Nimai's Room. Below that, the build number is 3, quite low, and the build date is the 23rd of April 1999, 2:10 PM to be exact. Selecting Game Start or Stage 1 will essentially initiate the same part of the game. After a while, we'll get a short Geist intro screen with very solemn music. I guess this was to be the real menu screen on release. Following that, we get an intro cutscene that is quite detailed. There isn't any audio unfortunately, but it shows the native population of a planet being attacked and invaded by an alien force. It then shows some bloke in a space station watching the destruction, promptly get in his spacecraft and head for the planet in need. Turns out his name is Rook, although that's all I know of the storyline. Regardless, just like in Star Fox, it's all about the little hotshot flying in his plane to save the day. The cinematics were created by Netta Digital, who at the time worked on the TV show Babylon 5. After that whirlwind of a cutscene, the first level will begin. Before we play, we're presented with very Star Fox-like dialogue boxes. Interestingly, considering this was American developed, these are completely in Japanese. This is the most complete out of the 6 levels, and includes a fully modelled and textured environment. It's full of enemies, and even 2 boss sections where you can fly around at will. That's assuming the game doesn't crash before you get to that point anyway. If you fire repeatedly and create too many particle effects, the Dreamcast won't cope and restart. Not surprising considering its prototype state, but the controls are also a bit jerky. Still, it's functional, the most tantalising glimpse we get at what this game could have been if it released. You can even blow up the locals' buildings as you fly on past while, liberating them. It's all quite exciting really. Level 2 comes in second place for completion, also including enemies and a fairly complete but more industrial looking environment. It's clearly not finished however, as I could not make it to the end. I would reach a point where it would seem a boss fight was about to begin, but I would just get stuck on invisible geometry instead. Level 3 doesn't launch at all, so moving on to level 4, we're presented with your typical ice environment but without any enemies. At least we are for about a minute before colliding with another invisible wall. Level 5 starts with a several minute long uneventful cutscene as you fly through an environment based in the sky, full of floating buildings and other ships. Eventually you can control your ship, and the environment starts to include a freeway looking thing and a big waterfall. It looks great, but firing your weapons causes graphical glitches. Not that you would have a reason to fire though, there are no enemies. It goes on for a bit and yeah, you guessed it, you fly into an invisible wall. Level 6 is mostly empty apart from a few half-textured spaceships, followed by a frankly terrifying untextured object that is presumably the boss. It doesn't do anything however, and after that, well, you get the idea. Mike's room is the first level, but completely void of enemies. Not sure what the reason for this is, but now you know. Nami's room, however, is a sound test program. There are a few options here to tweak, but I can't change any of them since you need a keyboard. I don't own a keyboard with a Dreamcast controller plug, so I guess we'll leave it at that. Who do we have to thank for access to this previously lost game? Of course, it was the one and only Assembler Games Forum. During 2011, forum members pulled money to buy the prototype I've been showing for the princely sum of $700. Allegedly, the seller was a former employee of Sega who appears to have stayed anonymous. Those who helped with the purchase would receive a printed disc of the prototype, which would be sent out before a public release. The project even had a dedicated forum, which was needed since a lot of work was required before a stock Dreamcast would play it. Remember how I mentioned the game will crash if there were too many particle effects? This is because the game was developed on pre-release Dreamcast hardware that was presumably more powerful. The smarties at Assembler put a lot of work into making the game as compatible as it is now, so we have a lot to be thankful for. That prototype was released in 2012. It wasn't until the September of 2021 that another build would surface. This was released by the website Sega Dreamcast Info Preservation Games. You can find that linked below. It includes a great write-up on the differences between their prototype and the original, although unfortunately, they don't reveal how they acquired the prototype. It doesn't include a build date, but appears to be older than the other prototype. This is because it's missing textures, enemies, and a host of other smaller details. The date they were built would definitely be close, but the assembler's version is what I would recommend. There are several websites selling reproductions that include artwork in a nice case, but it's very easy to locate both prototypes online. These are available in both GDI and CDI formats, depending on how you wish to play them. Personally, I burned the CDI to a disc and played on original hardware. Subotnik claims big things were planned for Geist since it was a launch title, even including a range of toys. He also claims that the builds shown in this video are very incomplete and couldn't even be considered betas. Regardless, it appears this was the catalyst for him leaving Sega, but it seems he went on to have a very fruitful career. He later worked with Microsoft on both the original Xbox and Xbox 360, and is now employed at Intel. Yuji Naka, on the other hand, would eventually leave Sega and later worked with Square Enix to create a platformer called Balan Wonderland in 2021. didn't review well, and sold poorly. He claimed he was removed from the project just before its release, and for that, he sued Square Enix. He was then arrested twice on suspicion of insider trading. So, yeah, I don't wish to paint a villain in this story, but big yikes. In summation, it's a shame that Geist Force was never completed. Sure, it's very similar to Star Fox, but still played well nonetheless, and would have been a great example of the Dreamcast's power. Let's at least hope a more complete prototype surfaces one day.